Yeah, and another controversial figure is Antonio Margarito, and I remember reading I think it was an interview on Boxing Scene, and I think they maybe got it from your mailbag where you said you didn't believe that he didn't know what was in his gloves prior to the Mosley fight. I mean, do
Right.
you think that, and why would you think that?
Yeah, I do. I do. And by the way, I totally understand anybody believing that he's been a criminal his whole career and that he's loading his gloves. He's had been loading his gloves his entire career. I had a conversation with Max Kellerman shortly before this past Saturday's show in Las Vegas. And Kellerman expressed that. He said he believes that Margarito was always just sort of an average fighter who was just tough. And he was made into a special fighter because he always loaded his gloves, to which I didn't believe. And I told Max I understood why Max believed that, because Max said, well, once he was busted, he never won a major fight, never looked the same, never scored a knockout. And I understand that. And what I pointed out to Max is, I said, Max, when he won the biggest fight of his career in the summer of 2008, the pinnacle of his career against Miguel Cotto, he took a lot of damage in that fight. And you have to realize that even though he wasn't an old man, Margarito had been a professional boxer for 15 years and absorbing punishment in all of his fights, but also in the gym. The way he trained was the kind of training that burns a fighter out. So it's when you're a fighter with Margarito's style and you're taking as much punishment as Margarito took. I mean, he had a great chin and he stuck it out there. You're going to have a steep decline. And, it wasn't surprising to me that it happened after the Mosley fight. But one thing that I had that Max didn't have is having covered Margarito's career going back to 1996, going back to when he was a nobody, going back to when he wasn't even being trained by Javier Capetillo. I remember Margarito then. I remember covering Margarito's fights for newspapers. Against the likes of Rodney Jones, which he lost in Culver City. I was at that fight as media, and when he upset a guy named Alfred Nkama on a foreign boxing card. And I told Max he always had damaging punches. Now he wasn't able to heap a lot of damage on Rodney Jones because Rodney Jones was a tall southpaw boxer who stayed on the outside, kind of like a poor man's Winky Wright. But I said everybody else, and not just in fights but in training, they got busted up when Margarito put hands on them, even when they had headgear on and the big gloves. And he said, well, he was probably loading up his wraps for the sparring sessions. And I'm saying, well, and I heard that. I heard people make allegations about that, after he was busted in the Mosley fight. One of the guys that he sparred with, during the Mosley camp said, yeah, my eye socket got busted, and I believe his hands were loaded. But here's the thing. If they were doing that, they were doing it in front of everybody. I mean, it's not like they went to a private room to have their hands wrapped before every training session. His hands were wrapped right there in front of everybody. He always had an open camp. He never shut out the public, never shut out the media. You could follow him anywhere in the gym. You could watch, most of the interviews that were done with Margarito going into the Cintron rematch, going in to the Cotto fight, going into the Mosley fight. When you went to visit him at the gym, Top Rank had a publicist there, a guy named Bill Kaplan, he's a publicist with Golden Boy Promotions, but at the time he was with Top Rank. And what Bill Kaplan would do was sit the media, and it'd be a bunch of us. It wouldn't just be one guy. We would surround Margarito and his trainer Capetillo while Margarito's getting his hands wrapped. So I'm thinking, okay, if this dude has been loading his gloves every time he spars and every time he fights, that must make Javier Capetillo the most devious, sneaky, criminal mastermind in the history of boxing to be able to pull the wool over that many commissions, over that many inspectors, over that many people in the gym, sparring partner trainers, media like myself, members of the public. They were able to just like magic slip in some loaded wraps every time this guy trained and every time this guy fought. To me, that sounds ludicrous. I mean, honestly, that to me that's ludicrous. And I'll add a little something else, and which really irks me about the Margarito scandal. And that is, I fully support and agree with the California State Athletic Commission's decision to strip Capetillo of his license and to strip Margarito of his boxing license after that incident before the Mosley fight. The rules are very clear. You don't have any kind of you can't even have wet hand wraps. When you're wrapping your hands, there's a certain amount of gauze and wraps that are allowed for a boxer's hands going into a professional fight. But everyone writes that he had hand wraps dipped in plaster, and that's not the truth. Most of these people saying this have never actually seen the evidence, never seen the wraps. They were some old, wet, bloody wraps, and they didn't have plaster on them. If you read the report, or if you covered the commission hearing, there were traces of substances that could be used in plaster. And it could be like chalk and water, you know what I'm saying? And if you talk to commission, and I've talked to some guys on the commission who used to be with the commission who are no longer with the commission, and I asked them, well, how much of these traces were on the confiscated wraps? And he said, like a pinch of salt. So that's the truth. But what's written out there is that he had like he had pieces of plaster in his wraps or in his gloves, or his wraps were like dipped in plaster of Paris, and that's just not true. And I'm not saying that we should look at Margarito as a sympathetic figure, because the sad truth is Margarito made out very well following this scandal. For starters, he had Bob Arum, who kind of made it his personal mission to get him recommissioned somewhere in the United States and to get him a huge fight. But I'm going to say the boxing media, my peers among boxing writers who grandstanded so much and got on their soapbox and vilified Margarito, I will say that they did something that the great Hall of Fame promoter Bob Arum could not do, and that was they made him a viable, marketable B-side for a pay-per-view star like Manny Pacquiao, or for a pay-per-view star like Miguel Cotto. They made him a villain. They gave him a black hat and made him interesting for the first time for HBL's 24/7. For the first time among casual fans, you could recognize this guy, because he never got any recognition when he was just an honest welterweight title holder who was willing to fight all of the top 10 contenders of his division. He was that one guy who would fight a Paul Williams or an undefeated Kermit Cintron or a once-beaten Joshua Clottey. He didn't get any notice, and he wasn't selling tickets, and he didn't do great ratings. But after being made into the villain, into the bad guy, suddenly he's a pay-per-view B-side, and he made a lot of money with the Pacquiao fight and a substantial amount of money with the Miguel Cotto rematch, and enough for him to retire comfortably. And I got to say, he has all those people who vilified him in the media, he has them to thank for that. And he's aware of it. You know what I'm saying? So for all those folks who crapped on him and vilified him and all you did was make him more marketable. And Robert K. Arum took advantage of it. And this villain, this guy who you guys said belongs in jail, he benefited financially because of that.
Yeah, a lot of people tuned in to just to see Pacquiao take him out. It's just like, yeah, let's just watch Pacquiao.
Guess what? He got a piece of that pay-per-view upside. Guess what? He got a piece. He didn't just get paid a flat fee. He got paid 7 figures plus a piece of that pay-per-view upside, and it was substantial.
Oh, he went laughing all the way to the bank, and they perfectly cast Margarito, though, and this whole incident fit into that persona well. I remember the first time that I knew Margarito was just like this big, mean man was before the Cintron rematch, and he was like mocking Cintron with the crying stuff. It's just like, I'm like, man, this guy's just pure evil. He's just out there to kick people's asses.
Not a nice guy. No. He's a dude. He's
a bully.
He's a dude. He's a dude who, you got to be a rough dude if you're going to choose boxing as your profession when you're 16 years old. You got to be hard. And that's a hard environment that he came out, that he came from.